In the fifth Sunday of Lent, the Church proclaims the Gospel of the resurrection of Lazarus. In the first centuries, this episode was used for the preparation of catechumens. They received through this episode an idea of death and resurrection, which was the deepest meaning of the baptism they were called to receive in the night between Holy Saturday and Easter Sunday. This episode is narrated in the chapter 11 of John's Gospel. It is the last of the 7 signs of the Gospel of John. John divides his Gospel in 2 big parts. The second part, the second half of the Gospel, narrates the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The first half is articulated in 7 miracles, which are 7 signs or 7 keys of interpretation to understand better the second part. So they are explaining in advance what we are going to read in the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The first of these 7 signs is the wedding of Cana. The last one is the raising of Lazarus. This episode is graphically very close to the narrative of the death and resurrection of Jesus himself. That's why it's the last sign, and that's why it moved a lot the Christian communities. The whole history of Christian art is full of representations of this episode. We have works of Marco Rupnik, of Anna Kuipers, of Vincent van Gogh, of Rembrandt, of Rubens, of Sebastiano del Piombo, and we have here a fantastic representation made by Caravaggio, with the gesture of the hand of Jesus very similar to the gesture he already used 9 years before in 1600 in the representation of the vocation of Matthew, which is situated in the church of Saint Louis des Français in Rome, San Luigi dei Francesi. Well, this gesture is imitating the gesture of the creation in the Sixtine Chapel by Michelangelo. The meaning is that the resurrection of Lazarus is like a new creation. But Caravaggio is just the fulfillment of a long, very long history of variations and developments about this hand of Jesus in this episode of raising of Lazarus. In the Middle Ages, the hand of Jesus in this representation, for instance, of Juan de Flandres, an artist who is between the Flemish lands and Spain at the end of the Middle Ages, well, the hand here is a blessing hand. But this gesture in the Middle Age is not only blessing, means not only to bless, but means also just the word, because it's a gesture someone has to do if he or she wants to speak, to take the word. So the hand of Jesus here is symbol of himself. He is the Word. He is the incarnated Word. And this Word entering in the death, touching the death, reaching Lazarus, gives him life. Because this Word is just Jesus crying out, come out, Lazarus, come out from your tomb. This is the life-giving word, which is Jesus himself. The masters of Middle Ages combined this gesture with the underlining of the two fingers, which are a symbol of the two natures of Jesus, really God and really human. So again, the hand is symbol for Jesus himself. Giotto has the same gesture. This medieval representation of the blessing hand or the word, which is Jesus himself, is expressing the movement of Jesus coming to Bethania, which is near to Jerusalem. Well, this supposed for Jesus his own death, because people around Jerusalem already decided to kill him. That's why he was a little bit more in the northern part of the land of Israel. He wanted to withdraw to the north, but the sisters of Lazarus called him, and he waited 2 days and then went to Bethania. So is narrated in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. This 2 days waiting is symbol of the distance between the cross and the resurrection. So he is experiencing death and resurrection already in his walk, in his path towards Jerusalem, because it will be his last way, the last time he goes down to Jerusalem. He will then remain there and give his own life there. Also, in the Eastern tradition, we have the same gesture. Here is, as usually in the Eastern tradition of this episode, the center of the image, the very center of the image. We have here an example in England, southern England, where we can see very clearly the two fingers of Jesus. Here in the Codex Egberti. Here in Codex Purpureus, beginning of 6th century. This gesture is very old. We find it in this example of mosaic of the 6th century in Ravenna, in Sant'Apollinare Nuovo. But we have also another version of this gesture, not only a blessing hand or a hand which means the word, but also a hand of which is indicating, showing. Well, here we have a fresco of the 10th century in Sant'Angelo in Formis, not far from Naples, southern Italy, and with one hand Jesus has a scroll, so a written word, and with the right hand he shows. Both hands are expressing the life of Jesus. He is the incarnated Word, and he is the one who shows the works of the Father, the works of God. He is the revelation of the works of God, as it is written also in chapter 11 of John's Gospel. The illness of Lazarus is not for the death, but it is for the demonstration, the revelation, the manifestation of the works of God. Here in this example in Greece, in Athens, the same gesture, the showing hand. Duccio di Buoninsegna, a Byzantine icon again, and Monreale, not far from Palermo. The same gesture. An ivory of the 9th century, showing hand, but also the scroll in the other hand. Both hands are translating each other. In the sarcophagi of the 4th century, we have a lot of representations of the resurrection of Lazarus. With one hand, Jesus has the scroll. What is he doing with the right hand? Well, here is missing. But we discover a new object, which is not present in the text of the Bible. We discover this object already in an ivory of the 9th century. With one hand, Jesus is indicating the Father or the heaven. With the other hand, he has a stick. What is this stick? Well, it's very similar to the staff of the angel announcing the good news of the resurrection of Jesus in the morning of Easter to the women coming to the sepulchre, to the empty tomb. That means that the stab of the stick of Jesus in the episode of Lazarus is very near to the stick of the angel. The meaning is that both episodes are very near, resurrection of Lazarus and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We have here another example in Ravenna, Sant'Apollinare Nuovo. Here we have some informations more. This fresco is nowadays in New York, but comes from northern Spain, and the stick of Jesus is the wood of the cross, the cane of the cross, that expresses exactly the narrative of the gospel. Jesus accepted to go to Jerusalem, so accepted to enter in death, and that allowed him to transform death in life. But other examples are giving us other models for this stick of Jesus. This example is a contamination with pagan structure, a pagan model. So you can see Zeus Christus is written here. So Jesus Christ as Zeus, as a pagan god, and he has this stick which is more a scepter of power. Well, we can think that both meanings are coming together. The wood of the cross, the stick of the cross, of the passion, is actually the very scepter of power. The only power of Jesus is to give his own life, so the cross. And this allows him to give life. So this stick is at the same time scepter of power and cross of Jesus. And this stick allows him to give life, like in the representation of this reliquary of Brescia of the 6th century, where we have at the same time the episode of the blind who is healed by Jesus through the stick, and the resurrection of Lazarus, again with the stick. Again, an example here, ivory of the 7th century, and in the sarcophagus. Again, stick and word, a reciprocal translation. This stick is also sign for the direct contact, physical contact of Jesus with death. It's like to accept, to receive the death in his own body. Here is again the scepter of power. We have a lot of examples in the early Christian sarcophagi of the 4th century, and where we lost the scepter or the stick, we can suppose that there was a stick. Also here. In the frescoes of the catacomb, we have the same shape. Jesus raising Lazarus with the stick. Almost every representation of the resurrection of Lazarus in the frescoes of the catacomb have the same object. But where does it come from on the point of view of art history, on the point of view of iconographical models? Which other figures were represented with a stick? We find a model in the Jewish art. Here we are at the beginning of the 3rd century in eastern Syria, in a synagogue called Dura Europos. And we have Moses with the stick. The stick he received by God according to the text in chapter 4, verse 17 of Exodus. With this stick, he opened the Red Sea and he closed it again. So is the stick of Passover, is the stick of freedom, of Exodus. Christian art imported this figure of Moses. We see here a Christian version of Moses, again with the stick, beating a rock in the desert in order to give water to the people. We have here again Moses in a very similar position, very similar to Jesus calling Lazarus out from his tomb. But here is Moses giving water to the people. This is a very interesting sarcophagus. We have Moses and the stick of Moses and the water from the rock, but the same stick is now in the hands of Jesus, transforming water in wine in the wedding of Cana, and again in the hand of Jesus, giving life to Lazarus. We have here the first sign according to the John's Gospel, the first of the 7 signs, which is the wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the last one, the last sign, which is the resurrection of Lazarus, but both with the same stick which we find in the hands of Moses. So both linked with the Passover of Israel. The both main signs of Easter, of Christian Easter, are now linked with Jewish Passover. We have the stick in the hands of Jesus in the sarcophagi in other representations, or in representations of other miracles, like here in the multiplication of breads. But we have here again the Word of God, word and stick. Again here, stick and word. Here in Santa Sabina door of the 5th century, is a wooden door, we have the stick of Moses on the right hand and the stick of Jesus on the left part of our slide, in the representation of the multiplication of breads and fishes, and in the representation of the wedding of Cana in Galilee. Here again we have the stick for the wedding of Cana and the stick for Lazarus, first and last of the 7 signs. Here the man with a stick is not Jesus. He is a representation of the wind of God coming on the bones of Israel who are spread on the landscape in Babylon. And through the word of God, we can also recognize the scroll of the word of God, the word of God pronounced by Ezekiel, by the prophet. The wind is coming and giving life to give life to these bones. So we see 2 risen young men on the left part of this sarcophage, and these are risen Israelites, and resurrection here means the possibility for Israel to come back to the land of Israel. So exile is like a death, is like to be in a tomb, in a sepulcher, and to receive life is to come back to the land of Israel. This stick here is of course very close to the stick of Jesus in the episode of raising of Lazarus, which we have again here in this sarcophage, and again about the miracle of Cana. The examples are a lot. And they show us that the Christians of the 4th century in these pieces of art were able to deepen the sense, the meaning of the biblical text, to disclose, to reveal the deep relationship between the Easter of Jesus, the Passover of Israel, and our death and resurrection.